Hello, historians. Okay, today we're talking about basically the turn of the century, but this really starts in the late 1800s, 1880s, 1890s. People are seeking reform. 1900s, they're really starting to want change. They realize that we have unprecedented technology bounties. They're realizing that we can do stuff now that we never had the ability to in the past. Remember this whole scientific management, the Taylorism ideas were shaping the way we did business. There's more money available, really, than there had ever been before. And with the application of expertise and all these technologies we have, we can fix the world. We can make things better. So this is the progressive era. So let's go with like the 1890s through the beginning of World War I, really. And this is something that's happening around the world. We're getting changes like everywhere. This is okay. This people are reading Karl Marx in Europe and starting to think, wait, we don't have to be um, dominated by our bosses. We could actually start having a say in our lives. And so Karl Marx had written his stuff years before this, but it was being passed around, read. Um, People in the Soviet Union, or it wasn't the Soviet Union yet, it was just Russia at the time, were taking this and thinking, okay, why don't we have a socialist republic? And they actually did. When they overthrew the Tsar, they, for a while, actually had a republic. And then things went kind of horribly, horribly wrong under Lenin, and then under Stalin. He was just a bad human being, and things went really bad. But the idea for progress and was there. So in France, they were taking this as, okay, let's work towards the benefit of all humankind. And it was an impulse around the world. It was felt differently here, but it was the same general impulse worldwide. And remember, I'm going back to this Panic of 1893 again, because, I mean, our country's run on money. The capitalist impulse is big with us. We believe that, well, we have the gospel of wealth here. We also believe in the prosperity doctrine in the US generally, that if one is rich, they have God's favor. It's a unique way of thinking for Americans. I'm not saying all Americans think this way, but it's very much still with us from the puritanical start of the United States. But we started questioning because the Panic of 1873 really like kind of rattled us. And like maybe the wealthy aren't like the ones that should be in charge of everything. And then the Panic of 1893, because there had been more and more business consolidation, more monopolies, it seriously rattled us. It's like, wait, the prosperous might not be actually thinking in our best interest. Maybe, just maybe, they shouldn't have control over everything. So the Panic of 1893 rattled us enough to think, okay, maybe we should take all the decisions out of the hands of the elite few and put it into into the hands of experts who could actually help us all, as opposed to the wealthy helping us all. Because what I skipped in the previous lecture, when there was a picture of Andrew Carnegie. He wrote a book called The Gospel of Wealth. And in his book, he wrote that it was the wealthy understood money better in a way that the poor could never understand money. And it's the social responsibility of the wealthy to be philanthropists because they know how this should be spent. So they should spend the money on, like, Carnegie Hall, this great concert hall for the edification of all humans. Um, the the public libraries, um, the great colleges, universities, they should spend this money for public benefit. So, and this was still going on it's still really going on, but more and more people were starting to believe also in the faith of applied knowledge. Let us have experts in all these fields as counsels that are proper advisors that aren't just rich people making it up as they go along. Also, at the same time, this is important, muckrakers sounds bad because it's people digging through the mud and the filth to find information. So muckrakers is a disparaging term, but this is about journalists, specific types of journalists who are like looking at Standard Oil to write about their bad business practices, their shady dealings, how they run small oil producers out of business and cause them to fall into despair and death. One of the muckraking journalists was writing about her daddy being run out, and he died from this. Ida B. Wells Barnett, she was writing about the lynchings in the South. It was not I don't even know if it would be called an open secret. It was the towns in the South were engaging in lynching for to control the towns, to prevent blacks from voting or owning businesses that were too prosperous or any of the other non-crimes that the law wasn't necessarily going to convict them on. The general population was convicting them on and murdering them. And Ida B. Wells Barnett was writing so people around the country could see the horrors that were going on in the South. There's one woman, what is her name? Her name is not Ida, I can tell you that. She had herself committed to an asylum to expose the terrible conditions in the mental asylums at the time. The most famous one, I think, would be Upton Sinclair. Has anybody had to read any of his? Upton Sinclair wrote about the horrors of the meatpacking industry. It's like, oh, some dude's arm fell in it, keep grinding, or, oh, look, there's a rat, that's filler. Yeah, it upset a lot of people. I didn't eat processed meat for 3 years after reading The Jungle. Yeah, I don't eat meat now, so I don't have to worry about processed meat, but this is before the federal government had a say in what went into foods and drugs and stuff. So under Teddy Roosevelt, the Clean Food and Drug Act, I think it's called, don't quote me on the exact title, but because of Upton Sinclair and the muckraking journalist, Roosevelt put into place a law saying, you know what, you really need to be held responsible for what you're putting in our sausages. Yes, I agree with you. Meat is very expensive right now because we are in an economic recession. And now you know how it feels to be in the 1890s. These economic recessions come and go. We're always going to have it. It's give or take a 20-year cycle. Like every 10 years, there's a little slab. Every 20 years, there's, we call them recessions now. In the old days, they called them panics. But maybe they aren't panics now because we have safety nets in place. After the Great Depression, we put in a ton of safety nets because, yeah, we didn't want to go through that again. Next class, I'm going to be talking about religion with reform. I'm going to specifically talk a lot about Well, the temperance movement, prohibition, was a religious movement trying to get rid of vice in the cities was part of a religious movement. There was a lot going on. Social justice was big at this time. We're like, okay, should we let people starve to death in the streets? Should we actually care for our poor as the gospel says we should? Or do we just let it continue to happen? Are we going to live to the Christian ideals that the majority of Americans believed in? Okay, but remember how I was saying we're going against the monopolies? This is why. Everybody thought that the various monopolies had control over our Senate. And the panic of 1893 was so bad that the Rockefellers had to lay off 3 senators. Haha. Yeah. So here, the Steel Beam Trust, the Copper Trust, Standard Oil Trust. Look at his money bag is in a barrel. There's a paper bag trust. I really need to look that up. Someone needs to look that up for me, whatever the hell a paper bag trust was. But each of these had way more sway over the Senate and the Congress than your average American voter did. Luckily, we've reformed that, and that's not a problem anymore at all. So anyway, in this political cartoon, you can't see the little thing here, but the People's entrance is closed. And here it says the Temple of Trusts, and this is for the monopolists by the monopolists, is basically what it says. Okay. Anyone doing social work as their learning objective or sociology? Jane Addams is the person. She was a very, very important figure. So she started social work as a profession. There had been sociologists, there had been social reformers. Remember I told you about Jacob Riis, the photographer, who's taking pictures and sending that information out to the world. He would be considered a muckraker too, honestly. Anyway, I need to fact check myself, but I think she's the one that witnessed the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire and was really traumatized by it. Did I tell you guys about the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire? That was a pivotal moment in American history. And it's so freaking horrific. I don't even like talking about it. It's so horrific. So, hold on. Let me pull up a year. Sorry, guys. Okay, 1911 was the Shirtwaist Fire. So, from that, the reason it was as horrific as it was is that the bosses were padlocking the doors so the girls couldn't take breaks. So these young girls were working, 17, 18, 19-year-old girls were working in this factory sewing shirtwaist, or like really nice long shirts for women that kind of look like men's shirts. It was a style to have a more masculine suit-like appearance with their clothes. Look up the Gibson Girl if you're interested in that fashion. So there was tons of like sewing threads, and when you sew, there's a lot of dust created, which is why they tell you to dust your sewing machine out every time you use it. So a lot of dust, bolts and bolts and bolts of fabric. It was a tinderbox that, these young ladies were all locked inside because their bosses didn't want them taking a smoking break. Of course, people going to smoke. Therefore, extra dangerous to not have them a smoking place. And so, like, a spark caught on one of the bolts of fabric, kaboom, and the girls couldn't get out. And so, yeah, there was young ladies just, they have a choice, plummeting to their death out an open window or burning to death. And so they had all these young girls going boom, splat in front of this entire city watching. And yeah, from this, we started saying, yeah, maybe businesses shouldn't be able to lock people in. Maybe they shouldn't be allowed to forbid them to have breaks to go to the bathroom and smoke a cigarette. And so we started thinking about reforms. And let me just double check that it was Jane Addams that saw it, because one of the great reformers of the time, she saw it and was changed forever. Um, Hold on a second. Sorry about this. I always need to fact check myself on things. Um, anyway, I'm going to give up. But yeah, they also started working on child labor reforms at this time. Don't quote me that it was her that saw it, but many people saw it. Many people started working for change. But Jane Addams is specifically important to all we're talking about today because she wanted to make social work, fixing these kind of problems, a real and true profession. And specifically, she courted young women into this profession. W.E.B. Du Bois, sociologist, he criticized Jane Addams, saying that she was doing womanly accounting. Like on the big plantations and stuff and the large households, women were the business managers of these households, and they kept all the records and stuff. And so as she started her Hull House, which was a social work project, and she kept detailed records on every single soul they worked with, um, who was getting what kind of help, everything. She kept detailed records, and W.E.B. Du Bois is like, nah, sorry, that's just womanly work. It turns out, over the century since, social work now and sociology in general is done Jane Addams' way and not W.E.B. Du Bois's way as much. So it's just kind of really interesting how he critiqued her, and then this became the industry standard. So Hull House was in Chicago. She bought this house, set it up in a very poor area, and so they had like poor people come in and take lessons on how to take care of their babies, sanitation methods, like taught them how to do sewing so they could get jobs. And so they had wealthy and middle class young women come live in the house, live there and train to be social workers so that they could go out and spread this kind of education to their towns. So yeah, it's kind of smacks of elitism a bit. Well, yeah, it should, because it was elitism, because they thought, yes, we are wealthy, we are in a position to fix things. So yeah, it was like a training camp for basically young socialites to come and learn how to be better people, and it was helping the poor people in the neighborhoods improve their lives. So yeah, this is really important to the era. And this is my favorite era of historical dress. I love the 1910s for their outfits. Oh, Mary Poppins. Mary Poppins type of dress. It's kind of off, but pretty good. Okay, remember this is the time of experts. So the American Medical Association, National Association of Manufacturers, we're having licensing now for lawyers, for city managers. We were starting to create these professional organizations. Ooh. And I just remembered what I want to tell you guys, and I get excited. Women were, okay, remember, poor women have always worked outside the home. Poor women have always had jobs. But now there were jobs open to work middle class and wealthy women, and they could go into social work, teaching, nursing. The business world was still circumscribed. At this time, bank clerks were guys. and then it opened up and the pay decreased, and then now most bank clerks are women. But at the time, that's a whole different conversation. But there were professions now open to women. They could be out there earning their own income, choosing when they married and whom they married. Oh, I don't have as much detail as I want, but these young women who were working would get apartments together and stuff because, oh dear heavens, never, never should a young woman live alone. People would talk thinking that she lived an unwholesome lifestyle. So women would get apartments together in the cities, and they would they would just be each other's mutual support. But the people who didn't think women should be out there working, and there were plenty thinking women shouldn't be doing this kind of thing, they called it Boston marriages and say, yeah, that kind of stuff happens in Boston. Of course, implying lesbianism, but I'm sure it actually freed up a lot of lesbians to live the life they wanted to as well. So this time was that of the new woman. I so appreciate you laughing at my jokes. It means a lot to me. This is African American students at Hampton Institute, women studying human respiratory system to become nurses. And now, votes for women. And this is the time from okay, I can't exactly say that this is when it started because this isn't when it really started. Frederick Douglass, the guy who went and talked to Abraham Lincoln about the terror of slavery, he also went to, was it the Seneca Falls Conference, saying how important it is for women to have the right to vote. So votes for women was happening before. Yeah, okay. So votes for women was happening in the 1860s, and before that, like John Adams' wife, before we ever got the Constitution written, was saying, hey, you're working all this stuff for independence, remember the ladies. And he sent her a letter back, you're so cute and funny. That was not the reply she wanted, but... So no, the ladies were not included in the Constitution. Well, okay, John Adams was in France when the Constitution was written, but the Constitution, a lot of it was based on the Massachusetts Constitution that he did write. Anyway, we're not going to talk about my founding fathers. Anyway, so President Woodrow Wilson was in charge at the time, but we are also now at war. Not during Woodrow Wilson's first term. He ran his second campaign on, he kept us out of war. Turns out he did not keep us out of war. So during his second term in office, they started arresting the protesters protesting America because it was kind of sedition during the time of war. Everybody should pull together and nobody should be protesting. So they started arresting them. But I'll talk about that I'll talk about that in a little bit. Okay. There was a lot of women's groups. Remember, women can't vote yet, but they can exert social power. By forming the Women's Trade Union League, by the Women's Club, by boycotting groups that aren't doing the right thing, by going and basically harassing the governors of every state, they're able to get their point across. By withholding sex from their husbands, they're able to start pushing the national discussion, maybe we should have the right to vote. They did have social power to exert, and the more, I know, it works. And so the more they are a collective as a unit, an individual woman, no power, a group of women together can make change, especially at the city and state level. And once they got city and state level power, and they did, they could then exert that force at a national level. So things were happening. Okay, I'm going to tell you now about Alice Paul. I'm going to pause my video here to show you a different video, and it's going to be a parody of a Lady Gaga song about voting, and it's okay, I'm in love with it. Okay, so this video shows Alice Paul. She got arrested, and her and a bunch of women got arrested for protesting outside the White House. Because of the abuse, being arrested as a political prisoner, they went on hunger strike. The video then shows them actually strapping, like straitjacketing and strapping these women down, putting a funnel in their mouth and force feeding them, like pouring raw eggs down their throat to make them not die from starvation. Oh yeah, they were absolutely mortified that these women wanted to vote. That is man's domain. Women have complete control within the household over, like, what kind of food gets cooked, raising the children. Because after the Industrial Revolution, the Second Industrial Revolution, us working outside the home, or men specifically working outside the home, made the home a sanctuary, a place of not business, and women had no business in their minds doing that kind of work. It made them rough. It made them not feminine. It made them masculine. So anyway, Alice Paul and the hunger strikers were force-fed, and it went to a vote, and you're going to see in the video, the people with there's two color roses. And I think it was the people with the red roses, if I remember right, saying no, they didn't want women to vote, and the men with the yellow roses wanted women to be able to vote. But one of the ones who were going with the former way, the women not voting, in his pocket there was a note from his mommy. Think about me when you're making today's vote. And he was the deciding vote whether women would have the right to vote or not. And they show that all in this video that I'm going to pause this and show you this video now. So, yeah. Besides all those other reforms I talked about, the most important ballot reform of the time was making it secret. Because before, your employer would hand you a ballot and watch you as you marked the candidate your boss wanted you to mark. You were risking your job by checking somebody else. So by putting in place what they call the Australian ballot, because I guess Australia had already done this, and they're doing some important new ballot reforms now. They have ranked choice vote. But anyway, Australia is doing all kinds of stuff. But having a secret ballot meant that people were free to vote their own consciousness, and instead of doing whatever their boss wanted to. And it started to be one person, one vote now. Because before, political bosses would say, don't cut your hair or shave for a while. So they would come in like all beardy and with their mustaches, and the party bosses would go around and collect people, put them in a wagon, bring them to the voting station, and they would vote. And then they would hand the men razors and have them shave off their beards, and they'd vote again. And then they would take them away and have them shave off their mustaches, put on a new hat, and they got 3 votes. And now we're starting to get reform where it's one person, one vote. Also at this time, city managers were hired. It's not just somebody's popular, they get to be in charge, and they get to make policies. We have now professional management of the cities. So the mayor and the what is it called? The town board that we vote on? City commissioners. They hire a manager, and then that manager does the business of running the city with their approval. So now we have a management system that's more professional, more streamlined, better stuff going on. Okay, what else do I want to say? I'd like to tell you about Robert La Follette, but I don't have a chance. He was very important in Western politics and Western reform. He was running for president, but something went terribly, terribly wrong and he had to leave. But he was an important figure of this time for reforming everything. Let's see. Oh, I told you about the Shirtwaist Fire. Tammany Hall was reeling underneath these new reforms. They couldn't wield the power they used to. So Tammany Hall was like the most famous of all these political machines because they were New York. Ooh, and I do want to tell you about this. So I've had you read about Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. This is the time that they were doing their most important work. So W.E.B. Du Bois, under the auspices of the NAACP, wrote the magazine The Crisis, and, well, edited. And he was sending this out all across the country where the African American population could pick this up and say, this is what's being done, this is what we're fighting for. And they had access to this information now. I told you about Ida B. Wells Barnett. She was writing for the general population about lynchings. NAACP was founded. So there was a lot going on right now as far as African Americans fighting for their rights. And this was the time of the Harlem Renaissance. It sounds super elitist, but W.E.B. Du Bois was trying to gather what he was calling the talented tenth. He thought that, okay, Booker T. Washington wanted a general education. He wanted Black people to have the access to trade school, to good farming practices, to becoming professional teachers, and he was trying to build people up to become hardworking, industrious people. W.E.B. Du Bois, on the other hand, wanted to have elite, super educated 10% of the Black population to guide and direct African American progress. And so they were both working 100% towards the same goals, except W.E.B. Du Bois, through political action, through actually standing up saying, hey, we demand full and equal rights, whereas Booker T. Washington is like, once we have developed ourselves, they will have to respect us, is what he was saying. And of course, you read Du Bois's comments on that. He didn't buy into people would gradually accept them. He said it has to be taken. And so the Crisis was highlighting the work of that talented tenth, and like Langston Hughes was a great poet that he had, it's like, oh wow, you're a great poet. Let me give you a forum and a venue and help you become famous. All the great Black artists of the time, let me help you express this, become famous, musicians, writers, philosophers. So, okay, I'll talk to you more about the Harlem Renaissance after I talk about World War I, actually. So the temperance movement was a big deal right now. And yes, I know it's almost time to go, but when we think of the 1920s and the Roaring '20s, we think about illegal bathtub gin. And this is why we think of illegal bathtub gin, is at the time, we wanted to make the country a better, safer place. And this was actually a very Protestant movement. They saw the Irish Catholics and the Italians coming in, and they drank a lot of wine. And they sometimes missed work because they were going to bars, and the business owners were Protestant. The employees were Catholic, and it's like, well, if we take away the demon alcohol from them, they won't beat their wives, because they said this is why women were being beaten. They will be better employees. They'll be more productive at work. They'll miss fewer days. Let us ban alcohol. And these women's movements were also 100% at the forefront of banning alcohol. Did I tell you Broward County was formed because, okay, Miami-Dade and Broward were the same, they were the county, they were all Dade County. And the north part of Dade, what became Broward is for years, is like, can we be our own county now, please? No, we don't want you to be your own county. You're part of us. But then there was a vote, and North Dade County wanted to stay dry. They wanted to be dry and ban all alcohol sales. Were you able to hear me? Is that better? Did I just not give you guys the whole lecture? Okay.
We heard you entirely.
Oh, thank goodness. Thank you.
You're okay.
Whew. I don't trust students to tell me. Okay. So, anyway, North Dade County wanted to be dry. South Dade County, Miami, wanted to be wet because they relied on tourists. Tourists like to drink. So, when there was going to be a vote on whether Dade County would be dry or wet, Dade County, what became Miami-Dade County later, said, you know what? We're fine. You all can go be your own county now. And that's why I now live in Broward County and not North Dade. But then, of course, it became a federal law against alcohol, and then everybody had to abide under it. There are still dry counties in our country, though. And this is what I'm going to talk to you about in our next presentation, is the entire eugenics movement. And as much as I like Teddy Roosevelt, there's some stuff I need to tell you about him. And that is all of our recording. Stop.